Okay, so it looks like we are live, and this time we have the microphone turned on for the first part of this section. We are still recording the Count of Monte Cristo. We are at chapter 34, about halfway through. If you paid attention to yesterday's bit, we just listened to Franz, who overheard a conversation between a rich dude and a Roman bandit, and they're at in the Colosseum, and it's at nighttime. So right now, the conversation between the bandit and the rich dude they've just about to separate, and Franz is going to try and sneak away, and he thinks that he recognizes one of the voices. So here we go. We're going to hear the bandit say his last words, and then we're going to go straight into the exposition of Franz. Here we go.
Firmly depend upon you.
Saying these words, the Trans-Terravan disappeared down the staircase. Almost as if he knew how to speak with his mouth hole. Okay, here we go.
Firmly depend upon you.
Saying these words, the Trans-Terravan disappeared down the staircase, while his companion, muffling his features more closely than before in the folds of his mantle, passed almost close to Franz and descended to the arena by an outward flight of steps. The next minute, Franz heard himself called by Albert, who made the lofty
The outward flight of steps. Arena by an outward flight of steps.
The next minute, Franz heard himself called by Albert, who made the lofty building re-echo with the sound of his friend's name. Franz, however, did not obey the summons till he had satisfied himself that the two men whose conversation he had overheard were at sufficient distance to prevent his encountering them in his descent. In 10 minutes after the strangers had departed, Franz was on the road to Piazza d'Espagna, listening with studied indifference to the learned dissertation delivered by Albert, after the manner
Albert, after
Oof. That's way too big a breath.
descent.
All right. Notice we're a little bit quieter than the rest. Oh, no, not too bad. Okay, we're good. That will blend nicely. Here we go. Descent.
Descent.
Okay. Let's find where that is, and right there. Here we go.
At sufficient distance to prevent his encountering them in his descent.
In 10 minutes after the strangers had departed, Franz was on the road to the Piazza d'Espagna, listening with studied indifference to the learned dissertation delivered by Albert, touching the iron-pointed nets used to prevent the ferocious beasts from springing on this. I'm just going to end that sentence, Albert, because nothing made sense.
By Albert.
All right, good. Here we go.
To the learned dissertation delivered by Albert.
Franz let him proceed without interruption, and, in fact, did not hear what was said. He longed to be alone and free to ponder over all that had occurred. One of the two men, whose mysterious meeting in the Colosseum he had so unintentionally witnessed, was an entire stranger to him. But not so the other, and though Franz had been unable to distinguish his features from his being either wrapped in his mantle or obscured by the shadow, the tones of his voice had made too powerful an impression on him the first time he had heard them. Ooh, we're gonna need much bigger breath for that, Sonny. Much bigger breath.
By the shadow. The tones of his
You know, a little mouth snap there. Thank goodness we can clean that up digitally. But it never hurts to hydrate. Never hurts to hydrate. Here we go.
being either wrapped in his mantle or obscured by the shadow.
The tones of his voice had made too powerful an impression on him the first time he had heard them, for him ever to again forget them, hear them when... the shadow.
Again, forget them. Hear them. For him...
Yeah, there is some serious heavy breathing going on this morning. It's almost like I don't work out or, work on my breathing. But here we go. So we're going to go back to distinguish his features, obscured by the shadow.
Being either wrapped in his mantle or obscured by the shadow.
The tones of his voice had made too powerful an impression on him the first time he had heard them, for him ever to forget them. It was more especially when this man was speaking in a manner half jesting, half bitter, that Franz's ear recalled most vividly the deep, sonorous, yet well-pitched voice that had addressed him in the grotto of Monte Cristo, and which he heard for the second time amid the darkness and ruined grandeur of the Colosseum. And the more he thought, the more his entire conversation, that the person who wore the mantle was no other than his former host and entertainer, Sinbad the Sailor. Under any other circumstances, Franz would have found it impossible to resist his extreme curiosity to know more of so singular a personage, and with that intent have sought to There we go, we're getting on.
A personage, and with that
Personage, there we go.
to know more of so singular a personage.
And with that intent have sought to renew their short acquaintance. But in the present instance, the confidential nature of the conversation he had overheard made him, with propriety, judge that his appearance at such a time would be anything but agreeable. As we have seen, therefore, he permitted his former host to retire without attempting a recognition, but fully promising himself a rich indemnity for his present forbearance, should chance afford him another opportunity. In vain did Franz endeavor to forget the many perplexing thoughts which assailed him. In vain did he court the refreshment of sleep. Slumber refused to visit his eyelids, and the night was passed in feverish contemplation of the chain of circumstances tending to prove the identity of the mysterious visitant to the Colosseum. That was a lot of words. Okay, here we go.
Of circumstances tending to prove the
But that's so much breath.
Refreshment of sleep.
Okay, we're going to go back to sleep. La 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 la, and we're going to relax through some of this. Sleep.
In vain did he court the refreshment of sleep.
Slumber refused to visit his eyelids, and the night was passed in feverish contemplation of the chain of circumstances, tending to prove the identity of the mysterious visitant to the Colosseum with the inhabitant of the grotto of Monte Cristo, and the more he thought, the firmer grew his opinion on the subject. Worn out at length, he fell asleep at daybreak, and did not wake till late. Like a genuine Frenchman, Albert had employed his time in arranging for the evening's diversion. He had sent to engage a box at the teatro.
He had sent to.
We're still breathing pretty heavy, so let's slow down a little bit, and let's allow a day's work. Diversion. There we go.
His time in arranging for the evening's diversion.
He had sent to engage a box at the Teatro Argentina, and Franz, having a number of letters to write, relinquished the carriage to Albert for the whole of the day. At 5 o'clock, Albert returned, delighted with his day's work. He had been occupied in receiving his letters of introduction, and had received in return more invitations to balls and routs than it would be possible for him to accept. Besides this, he had seen, as he called it, all the remarkable sights at Rome. Yes, in a single day he had accomplished what his more serious-minded companion would have taken weeks to effect. Neither had he neglected to ascertain the name of the piece to be played at that night. Would
have taken weeks to effect.
See, now we're controlling our breath a little bit better. There you go. Just needed to warm up, stand up straight. Check for fluidity, and neither is the word we're looking for. Here we go.
What his more serious-minded companion would have taken weeks to effect.
Neither had he neglected to ascertain the name of the piece to be played that night at the Teatro Argentina, and also what performers appeared in it. The opera of Parisina was announced for representation, and the principal actors were Coselli, Moriani, and La Spezia. The young men, therefore, had to consider themselves fortunate in having opportunity of hearing one of the best works by the composer of Lucia dell'Amore, supported by 3 of the most renowned vocalists of Italy. Albert had never been able to endure the Italian theaters. We need to smaller that up a little bit. There we go. Much better. We're making the track lengths a little bit more manageable visually. There we go.
By 3 of the most renowned vocalists of Italy.
Albert had never been able to endure the Italian theaters, with their orchestras from which it is impossible to see, and the absence of balconies or open boxes. All of these defects pressed hard on a man who had his stall at the Bouffes and had shared a lower box at the opera. Still, in spite of this, Albert displayed his most dazzling and effective costumes each time he visited the theaters. But, alas, his elegant dress... His elegant toilet was wholly thrown away. Most worthy. What we're doing is we're looking and trying to see how I can put this big old sentence together. But alas. And sometimes we just cut them because they just don't quite flow or make sense, and they're going to be less fun for the listener. So here we go. We are closing in on 9:45. So we've got, okay, I'm just checking our stuff here. And thrown away. Mortifying reflection that he had nearly overrun Italy without meeting a single adventure.
Costumes each time he visited the theaters.
But alas, his elegant idea was wholly thrown away, and one of the most worthy But alas, his elegant thought was wholly thrown away, and one of the most worthy representatives of Parisian fashion had to carry with him the mortifying reflection. I'm going to cut a big piece of that sentence. We're going to go, but alas.
Costumes each time he visited the theaters.
But alas, it was wholly thrown away, and one of the most worthy representatives of Parisian fashion had to carry with him the mortifying reflection that he had nearly overrun Italy without meeting with a single adventure. Sometimes Albert would affect to make a joke of his want of success, but internally he was deeply wounded, and his self-love immensely piqued to think that Albert de Morcerf, the most admired and most sought after of any young person of his day, should thus be passed over and merely have his labor for his pains. And the thing was so much more annoying as, according to the character... He's kind of pissed because he's so popular and nobody likes him. He hasn't done anything fun in Italy, poor baby. Here we go.
Have his labor for his pains.
And the thing was so much the more annoying. Oh, that's such a good way to say that. And I can't get my mouth around it. Just can't get my mouth around it. Here we go.
Of his labor for his pains.
And the thing was so much the more annoying as, according to the characteristic modesty of a Frenchman, Albert had quitted Paris with the full conviction that he only to show himself in Italy to carry all before him, and that upon his return he should astonish the Parisian world with the recital of his numerous love affairs. Alas, poor Albert, none of those interesting adventures fell in his way. The lovely Genoese, Florentines, and Neapolitans were all faithful, if not to their husbands, at least to their lovers, and thought not of changing even for the splendid appearance of Albert de Morcerf. And all he gained was the powerful conviction that the ladies of Italy have this advantage over those of France, that they are faithful, even in their infidelity. Yet he could not restrain a hope that in Italy, as elsewhere, there might be an exception to the general rule. Albert, besides being an elegant, well-looking young man, was also possessed of considerable talent and ability. Moreover, he was a viscount, a recently created one, certainly, but in the present day, it is not necessary. So good.
Was a viscount, a recently
Yeah, I didn't like that transition, so we're going to go back to there. Was a viscount. Let's get all of it. There's a sound.
Was a viscount.
Good. All right. We're going a little fast again, so let's slow. Recently created one, certainly.
Moreover, he was a viscount.
A recently created one, certainly, but in the present day, it is not necessary to go as far back as Noah in tracing a descent, and a genealogical tree is equally estimated, whether dated from 1399 or merely 1815. But to crown all these advantages, Albert de Morcerf commanded an income of 50,000 lires, a more...
Lires.
Yeah. We are going to keep that breath. That breath feels good. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Who knows? Here we go. 50,000 lires, a more than...
Morcerf commanded an income of 50,000 lires.
A more than sufficient sum to render him a personage of considerable importance in Paris. It was therefore no small mortification to him to have visited most of the principal cities in Italy without having excited the most trifling observation. Albert, however, hoped to indemnify himself. That's fun. Hoped to indemnify himself. Drink. We're getting a slight popping on the lips. It is time for the lip balm. Or more importantly, the cherry chapstick. All right. Here we go. Indemnify himself for all these slights.
Without having excited the most trifling observation.
Albert, however, hoped to indemnify himself for all these slights and indifferences during the Carnival, knowing full well that among the different states and kingdoms in which this festivity is celebrated, Rome is the spot where even the wisest and gravest throw off the usual rigidity of their lives, and deign to mingle in the follies of this time of liberty and relaxation. The Carnival was to commence on the morrow. Therefore, Albert had not an instant to lose in setting forth the program of his hopes, his expectations, and his claims to notice. With this design, he had engaged a box in the most conspicuous part of the theater, and exerted himself to set off his personal attractions by the aid of the most rich and elaborate people. The box taken by Albert was in the first circle, although each of the 3 tiers of boxes is deemed equally aristocratic, and is, for this reason, generally styled the nobilities boxes. And although the box engaged for the 2 friends was sufficiently capacious to... sufficiently capacious. Oh, yeah. You don't get sufficiently capacious. That means it was big enough for the people whose brains aren't sufficiently capacious. I'm not brains, I meant vocabulary. Vocabulary. Here we go. Nobilities boxes.
Generally styled the nobilities boxes.
And although the box engaged for the 2 friends was sufficiently capacious to contain at least a dozen persons, it had cost less than would be paid at some of the French theaters for one admitting merely 4 occupants. Ooh. Okay, we did have a breath at the end of there, so we're going to steal that breath and move this guy over a little bit. Charming. Charming. Okay, we are getting down to the wire here. Where do we go? Okay, we can finish off this exposition and get to about 10 o'clock, and then we're going to have to call it a day because we have to run errands. Yes, we do. 4 occupants. So here we are.
For one admitting merely 4 occupants.
No, that didn't work. One merely admitting 4 occupants.
A dozen persons. It
had cost. Okay, back to it had cost.
Capacious to contain at least a dozen persons.
It had cost less than would be paid at some of the French theaters for one admitting merely 4 occupants. Another motive had influenced Albert's selection of his seat, who knew, but that thus advantageously placed, he might not in truth attract the notice of some fair Roman, and an introduction might ensue that would procure is such a tough word, because you have to hold back the plosives like procure. All right, but we're good.
Some fair Roman, and an introduction religiously placed. He might not.
Yeah, that was a big breath, and I did not like that big breath. Seat.
But that thus advantageously placed.
Who knew but that thus...
But that thus
Ew, God, I did not like that at all. So let's start off with the 4 occupants. That's what we're going back to. Here we go.
Theaters for one admitting merely 4 occupants.
Another motive had influenced Albert's selection of his seat. He knew, even though he was advantageously placed, he might not in truth attract the notice of some fair Roman, and an introduction might ensue that would procure him the offer of a seat in a carriage, or a place in a princely balcony, from which he might behold the gaieties of carnival. These united considerations made Albert more lively and...
All the gaieties of carnival.
We're working it, we're working it, we're working it. Yeah, it is starting to get warm in the studio, I tell you what. Okay, here we go.
Behold the gaieties of carnival.
These united considerations made Albert more lively and anxious to please than he had so far been. Oh, hitherto. I'm just going to say so far. Hitherto. Let's try this again.
Behold the gaieties of carnival.
These united considerations made Albert more lively and anxious to please than he had so far been. Totally disregarding the business of the stage, he leaned from his box and began attentively. God damn.
Business of the stage. He leaned.
Gosh darn is what I meant to say. Gosh darn. All these adverbs. Attentively.
Disregarding the business of the stage.
He leaned from his box and began scrutinizing the beauty of each pretty woman, aided by a powerful opera glass. But alas, this attempt to attract notice wholly failed. Not even curiosity had been excited, and it was but too apparent that the lovely creatures into whose good graces he was desirous of stealing were all so much engrossed with themselves, their lovers, or their thoughts, that they had not so much as noticed him or the manipulation of his glasses. The truth was that the anticipated pleasures of the Carnival, with the Holy Week that was to succeed it, so filled with... The truth was, let's start
Noticed him or the manipulation of his glasses.
The truth was that the anticipated pleasures of the Carnival, with the Holy Week that was to succeed it. Okay. Starting to lose that fun. We're probably going to need a break soon, which is fine. We're just going to need to take a break. But we're going to take a break there when the dialogue starts, so that no matter what happens, we have a good overlap in sound. Okay. Here we go.
Noticed him or the manipulation of his glasses.
The truth was that the anticipated pleasures of the Carnival, with the Holy Week that was to succeed it, so filled with every fair beast, which, beast, breast, tomato. Okay, here we go.
Noticed him or the manipulation of his glasses.
The truth was that the anticipated pleasures of the Carnival, with the Holy Week that was to succeed it, so filled every fair breast as to prevent the least attention being bestowed even on the business of the stage. The actors made their entreaties, Exit stage right. Okay, here we go.
Attention being bestowed even on the business of the stage.
The actors made their entries and exits unobserved or unthought of. At certain conventional moments, the spectators would suddenly cease their conversation or rouse themselves from their musings to listen to some brilliant effort of Morani's, a well-executed recitative. That's a recitative is when they replay a song from earlier.
Conversation or rouse.
And Sondheim is said to have hated recitative, which is why he's always writing new stuff.
At certain conventional moments, the spectators would suddenly cease their conversation.
Correct. Recitative.
Moments, the spectators would suddenly cease their conversation.
Or rouse themselves from their musings to listen to some brilliant effort of Moriani's, a well-executed recitative by Coselli, or join in loud applause at the wonderful powers of La Specchia. With that momentary excitement over, they quickly relapsed to their former state of preoccupation or interesting conversation. Towards the close of the first act, the door of a box which had been so far vacant. I'm going to change the word hitherto to so far. Here we go.
Or interesting conversation.
Towards the close of the first act, the door of a box which had been hitherto vacant was opened. A lady entered to whom Franz had been introduced in Paris, where, indeed, he had imagined she still was. The quick eye of Albert caught the involuntary start with which his friend beheld the new arrival, and, turning to him, he said hastily, "Okay, we are just about to meet Sinbad Sailor's young Nubian princess, if I do believe my eyes. But we are rolling on past 9:50 today. It is getting hot here in the studio. So what we are about to do is we're going to close out this particular session, and we will be back first thing tomorrow morning with the introduction of who? We don't know